Greetings, friends. So weed is apparently now legal across my country, Canada, and it's kind of an anticlimactic moment. I should be more excited because I like weed. I've been smoking weed for many years. It's nice to know that you can go to a store and to buy it, and you won't have this uncertainty of how am I going to get weed the next time. And I've always been lucky to get weed on the black market. It's always been fine, but some people aren't so lucky. They have to deal with shady people in shady places, and that's a problem. That shouldn't happen. That's one of the reasons it's good that it's now legal. But there are so many factors going on here that make it more complicated, because it's not good that this was achieved by sweeping federal legislation. Like, it's all legal for all of Canada, regardless of as to what certain provinces may think. Some provinces may want it more than others. It's better, I think, what the states is doing, where it's proceeding organically. Some states are legalizing it. Other states will probably hold out forever. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's more like a local process where you get that sort of organic buildup. I think that's sets a better precedent, because now it's like, oh wow, Justin Trudeau's Liberals, they made weed legal, but just as easily they can make some sweeping legislation for something else, something that you might disagree with. Like, oh, I don't like, now pedophilia is going to be legal. Okay, that's, not necessarily that, but just think of something crazy that would be crazy to you, and then now that's sweeping. Federal legislation can institute that because of democracy, yeah. So it sets a bad precedent, I think. But I don't know what the alternative would be, because this is Canada. We don't have local states. We're much more tied together. The provinces are much more part of the federal system. And secondly, they're upping the prices to $12 or $13 a gram. I've already been able to purchase weed in dispensaries. Buying on the black market all these years, I know that it should be no more than $10 a gram. And if you buy more, then it'll be cheaper. But if you just want a gram, then that's $10. But now it's $12, $13, $14 Canadian dollars. And that's, Canadian dollar is a little cheaper than the US dollar, but I still think it's a good deal compared to, I don't know what you would pay in the US, but so basically this is a swindle. They're totally robbing us, and I don't think most people realize, because the whole reason it cost $10 a gram on the black market was because it was illegal. Because then you have to have more caution, you have to put more sacrifice, there's more risk that if you get caught, you can go to jail. And that's why it costs $10 a gram. That's the extra. And then the government, by making this free, now the private producers, they have to worry about government taxes. That's the only thing. And this is Canada, so there's high taxes. So that might raise your costs of production. But everything else, your cost should be lower, because now you can rent a big space and use it as a greenhouse. Your cost should be lower than $10 a gram, not going up to $12, $13 a gram. That's total bullshit. That's absolutely infuriating to me. It should not cost that much on the free market. So this leads to the question, why is the government really doing this? It's all about money. Now, of course, the private producers, government licensed producers, they're going to make the most money, but the government's going to make millions and millions of dollars in taxes. Our socialist state has now been given a new lease on life. It won't last that long, but it'll give them some more money, because what do socialist governments do? Like in Canada, all they do is get into debt. That's all they know how to do. So they need to make more taxes to service their debt, and they do that historically through excise taxes on cigarettes, alcohol, and now weed is the perfect candidate for more money to keep this socialist machine going. So that's a shame as well. I love weed. It's just a shame how this was achieved. I don't think most people realize that they're getting shortchanged. What's going to happen is, I think, the market's going to be dominated by some big fish, a few big fish within a few years, within 5 to 10 years. All the small producers will go out of business. Well, I don't actually know that. That might not happen, but I think that's very likely to happen. if taxes keep going up, if just in the current climate, and the government's going to have certain stores where you can go to buy your weed. What happens when only a few producers dominate the business? Well, they'll raise prices even higher. It's all about money. They never cared about the fact that weed is a medicine. Weed isn't so harmful in comparison with other substances. It's basically benign. They never cared about all the other, the spiritual value or people who want to reflect. And most people aren't using weed for those reasons. They just like it recreationally. They like it for medicinal uses. So none of that was the real reason. The government just wanted money. Now, in this new legislation, Canadians will be permitted to cultivate up to 4 cannabis plants in their home, which is good. 4 plants, that's not so much, but I guess you could get a good amount of, weed to take care of your own use if you need it. However, I think in practice, very few Canadians are going to cultivate weed plants at home because of mold. It's not good to have really any plants in your home. I mean, maybe it's one thing if you have cactuses, small plants, but generally like having open soil, that's going to produce mold and spores. It's going to give you a skin rash. I know it happened to a friend of mine. So even with one or 2 plants, that can happen because it gets pretty tall. It gets like a meter and a half tall, and it can be a sizable plant. So in practice, the only home growers are going to be people who have access to an outdoor yard. Ideally, you want a greenhouse. You want to have a separate space, a separate greenhouse. So I don't think so many people are going to be cultivating it on their own. They're going to be relying on independent producers. I smoked weed for the first time when I was 17. Before that time in high school, when I'm 15, 16, I told my friends, I'll never smoke weed. That's for the losers, not the guys who are the wiggers, the white guys trying to be black, and then they'll never amount to much, and I just didn't see any positive role models to encourage me to smoke it. But there was a really intelligent guy who I respected at work. And we were at a work party, and it's a good thing that I had already been introduced to alcohol. Not necessarily that alcohol is great, but then I was able to compare how is weed to alcohol. And I instantly knew that first time that I liked the experience. I didn't get high enough. I was very curious, but I knew that I liked this. This is very interesting. It's much better than alcohol. And pretty much from my early 20s, it's been a part of my life. It's something that I use daily. I enjoy it. I like the way it makes me feel. I like the sorts of thoughts. And then by the time I got some weed when I was 17, maybe that's too young. I don't know. Looking back on it now, I think it would be too young if you're like 12 or 15, but I won't deny that lots of people smoke it at that age and they turn out fine. Maybe some others don't turn out fine. I mean, there's a legitimate argument that your brain is not fully formed until you're in your mid-20s. I totally understand that. I turned out all right. Because I have this attachment to weed, I am warned by the Hindu philosophers. And that, because I have not renounced desire, to something worldly, something physical, a feeling, a plant, because I have not renounced that desire, this pleasure, then I will become, upon dying, I will become a ghost wandering the earth, and I will seek to possess living weed smokers, to feed on the feeling and the high, to get the high, because I had to keep getting high when I'm a ghost. So that's pretty bad if the Hindus are right. Well, if Martin Luther is right, then I'll still get off the earth upon dying, provided I have a pure heart or pure enough in the eyes of God. I don't know who's right. I wouldn't say weed makes you think certain things, but it puts you in a certain headspace where you can be more reflective, more philosophical. Your perceptions are in some ways more clear. I wouldn't say it makes you better at everything. It changes your functioning of your brain. You may be more perceptive of of body language, facial expressions. That's why, people for music, they like to have certain drugs, often weed, to increase their experience, and even to use that creatively. I think it's a bit of a misconception that weed makes you unproductive. It's a difficult question because, there's a lot of lazy people who smoke weed. Weed is associated with a lot of potheads, or whatever you want to call them. Well, I'm a pothead too, but I mean, in practically every video on this channel, I've been smoking weed before doing the video or during the video. For me, it's been something that has very much helped productivity. It's good for doing work, mental work. Maybe you don't want to be operating heavy machinery, certain things. You don't want to be, flying a 747. But if you're doing an office job, if you're in front of a computer, if you have to write, or if you're doing basic manual labor, I do think weed can really boost your productivity. Not necessarily giving you energy. It might give you energy, but it sort of puts your mind in that right space so you can focus on the task at hand and really just plow through the task. Get a lot done. I've heard that recently Elon Musk was allowing his employees at Tesla or SpaceX, I don't know which one, to use weed. I don't know if that's true. I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised at all. Now, is Canada legalizing marijuana, is this a threat to conservative culture? Because weed has always been perceived as a danger by conservative culture. Maybe that was partly due to manipulation by the fake conservative elites, going back to the 50s and the 60s, or even before that, painting it as reefer madness. You go crazy, you start doing all these other drugs, you start doing coke and heroin and committing crime, and your life is a downward spiral. We know that's not true, but there's an open-mindedness that comes with psychedelics. Weed is a mild psychedelic. It's not nearly as strong as LSD or psilocybin or DMT, but it is a mild psychedelic. So maybe in the 60s and the 70s, when the Vietnam War was going on and the hippies, they were obviously a threat to the conservative culture, a threat from within. Just like before that, it was the Mexican laborers who initially introduced mainstream American culture to weed, and there was some antipathy towards the Mexican laborers because they're a different culture coming in there, and so it's understandable how weed would be viewed as a threat because it's associated with different customs, different culture that could undermine the strong pillars of American society or Western society in general, Canada too. I think there's a lot of valid stuff to say that weed has had some bad company. I mean, I don't have much respect for the hippies. I mean, I'm glad that weed was introduced to society so that I could use it as a young person, be introduced to it. However, I mean, the hippies, like I said, it was a degeneration of our culture, and but that's not to say that just the fact, that psychedelics are associated with them means that psychedelics are necessarily bad. However, the whole attitude of society was wrong. Oh, it's all for recreation, and I guess weed is for recreation too, but it goes much deeper than that. It should be something almost spiritual, philosophical. It's for quiet places. It's not really a social drug. It never has been. I never understood people who would want to smoke weed at a rock concert. I can understand wanting to be high, but why would you want the smoke to, get in everyone's face? You see, look what happened in the 70s. Most of the hippies started doing coke. So those hippies were never very serious about it anyways, because now they're doing coke, and so they didn't care about their spirit or learning anything deep through weed. They never really wanted to contemplate society or come to some deeper realization. No, they're just partying and doing coke now. Obviously, weed is not for everyone. Some people don't react to it the same way as others. They say that some people have underlying mental conditions. You can go crazy if you smoke weed. I've never seen that. But, obviously I've seen that some people, they get very, very paranoid. Like, you might get paranoid anyways, but some people, they really don't like it. They get nervous. Other people, it's just like, oh, I don't like it. I go to sleep, or they don't like it. It's not for more than 50% of society. The other 50% might like using it from time to time. Then less than 25% might like to use it, a few times a week. And then I think it's much less than that are like daily users. And that's just normal. And so when it comes to the question of, is weed now part of this liberal onslaught of attacking conservative values because this is a time when we have mass immigration from foreign cultures, when we all have a socialist government in Canada trying to erase all memory of our past? Is this a time when we want to be open to so much other stuff culturally, accepting so much, other cultural developments that don't have their origin in the West? I mean, you could make some argument, but obviously I don't think weed is a real threat. However, I do admit that there's something destabilizing about psychedelics. I mean, obviously, weed is a mild psychedelic, but it can still cause you to question some basic assumptions you've been brought up with. Look at things in a new light. Open your mind. I mean, I think those are good things, but perhaps for the vulnerable, or perhaps for I don't know. Perhaps for some people, or from the perspective of maintaining your culture, this could be something you want to avoid. So I think ideally society has addressed this in the past by allowing certain people to use psychedelics. I mean, outside the West, there were shamans, or in the West too, in the pagan days, they were definitely doing psychedelics. The Greeks did some form of LSD. They drank it. It was a fungus derived from rye, ergot, but the idea is you would get the people who are really, desire it and deserve it and are mature enough, and then they can use these medicines normally, and there would be some, I mean, in Europe, right? In Europe, they use alcohol from a younger age. And they don't have this binge drinking culture where college kids can drink themselves dead. That doesn't happen because they're brought up to it from a younger age. So that's more of an organic way of, teaching from the family, from your village or wherever, culturally introduced to these things in a safe way, so that you don't have the wrong attitude towards them. But I don't think weed is quite like alcohol. Like you can't die from it. You can't consume too much. It's relatively benign. But maybe there's something to be said for that, because now it's going to be accessible to anyone who's 19. I mean, there might be some differences from province to province, but so I think there should be a way for allowing those who deserve to experience psychedelics the means. However, there should also be a way of protecting vulnerable, impressionable people, and people who may have underlying mental conditions that could cause them to really go crazy. But this all requires a coherent culture, and we lost that a long time ago. The funny thing I heard is Quebec is trying to do it 21 years old to buy, but then in Quebec you only have to be 18 years old to get alcohol. So it's funny how they have this liberal attitude to alcohol. You can, in Ontario, for instance, you can only buy alcohol at government stores, the Liquor Control Board of Ontario, or the beer store, but it's the same thing. And but in Quebec, you can buy alcohol much from different places. It's much more loose to alcohol. So then, why this different attitude to weed? Because weed is a far less damaging than alcohol, if it's damaging at all. I don't know if you should be driving it while smoking, but obviously some people do that anyways. Why is this an anticlimactic moment? Because nothing's going to change. I'm going to keep buying weed like I've always been doing it. It's not something you want to do in public anyways, nor really should you do it in crowds of people, like I said, in rock concerts. The only thing that's going to change is now more of the business is going to be channeled into the legal private market, and the government's going to make a lot of money from that. Certain private producers are going to make a lot of money from that. Who knows? Maybe one day I'll get into the business. But my honest reaction here is, yeah, this is positive. But I also understand the threat to conservative culture, not necessarily from weed, because I like weed, but from this general pattern of activity of the erosion of cultural values and sweeping federal legislation to institute these changes, all for money. I could go on and on. You know I like weed. There's lots of things to say here, but I think that's enough for now. Hasta luego, amigos.